Welcome to the sixth lesson. So the previous lesson, we examined survey research and explored how quantitative researchers collect data using structured questionnaires. We also discussed questionnaire design, measurement, standardization, and the importance of validity and valid and reliable instruments. Sorry. Collecting high-quality data, however, is one part of good research. Another equally important question is, who should participate in the study? Few researchers have the time, resources, or funding to collect data from every individual in the population they wish to study. Instead, they collect information from a smaller group of participants known as a sample. The quality of the sample determines whether researchers can draw meaningful conclusions about the wider population. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to distinguish between the population and the sample, explain why sampling is necessary, understand the principles of probability sampling, describe the major probability sampling techniques, and justify the selection of an appropriate sampling strategy for quantitative research. Why is sampling necessary? In an ideal world, researchers would collect data from every individual within the population they wish to study. This is known as a census. The South African population census is conducted by Statistics South Africa, which is a very good example. Because every household is included, sampling is generally unnecessary. In reality, however, conducting a census is extremely expensive, time-consuming, and logistically demanding. Most research projects therefore rely on sampling. Sampling enables researchers to collect data from a smaller group while making carefully justified conclusions about the wider population. If the sample is selected appropriately, it can provide an accurate representation of the population from which it is drawn. Population and sample, the two concepts are fundamentally linked to quantitative research. The first is population. A population refers to the complete group about which the researcher wishes to draw conclusions. Importantly, the population is defined by the research question. For examples, all grade 9 learners in Gauteng, households receiving social grants in Johannesburg, registered social workers in South Africa, unemployed graduates under the age of 35, migrants living in a particular municipality. A population is therefore not necessarily the entire population of South Africa. It is a group relevant to the research objectives. A sample is a smaller group selected from the population. Researchers collect data from the sample and use the findings to make inferences about the wider population. Representativity. Representativeness. Yo, you can have a laugh. So you talk about representativity or representativeness. This is one of the primary objectives of quantitative sampling, which is to obtain a representative sample. A representative sample closely reflects the characteristics of the population from which it was drawn. If a population consists or contains 55% women and 45% men, 70% urban residents and 30% rural, or different age groups in particular proportions, then the sample should, as far as possible, reflect those dynamics or characteristics. It is about increasing confidence that the findings obtained from the sample are likely to resemble those that would have been obtained from the entire population. So we have probability sampling, quantitative research typically relies on probability sampling. Probability sampling means that every member of the population has a known and non-zero probability of being selected for inclusion in the sample. This principle is fundamental because it reduces selection bias and improves representativeness. Probability sampling also makes it possible to estimate sampling error and apply inferential statistical techniques. For those reasons, non-probability sampling is generally preferred whenever researchers wish to generalize findings to a wider population. Then we have a sampling frame. Before selecting a sample, researchers require a sampling frame. This is a list with database from which participants are selected. Examples include a register of students, an employee database, a municipal household register, voters roll, a membership list. The quality of the sampling frame influences the quality of the sample. If important groups are missing from the sampling frame, the sample no longer represents the intended population. Researchers should therefore ensure that the sampling frame is as complete and as accurate as possible. Sampling size. It's an important question. In every quantitative study, it's important to ask, how large should the sample be? The answer depends on several factors, including the size of the population, the level of confidence required, the acceptable margin of error, the variability within the population, available resources as well. Larger samples generally provide more precise estimates of the population characteristics. However, larger samples also increase costs and data collection times. Researchers therefore seek a balance between statistical precision and practical feasibility. Numerous statistical calculators are available to assist researchers in determining appropriate sample sizes. For most postgraduate research projects, sample size should just be justified rather than chosen arbitrarily. Types of probability sampling. There are several probability sampling techniques. Each is appropriate under different circumstances. The choice depends on the current question, the population, and the available resources. Simple random sampling is a technique that is generally considered simple. And simple random sampling, every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. Selection is entirely random. So researchers may use computer-generated random numbers, random number tables, lottery methods. For example, imagine a school with 500 learners. Each learner is assigned a number from 1 to 500. A computer then randomly selects 100 numbers. Those become the sample. Because selection is random, every learner has the same probability of inclusion. Simple random sampling reduces researcher bias and produces high representative samples when sampling frame is complete. Its limitations is that the researcher must first obtain a complete list of the population, again, which must be accurate and contain every member or item. Systematic sampling is often easier to implement than simple random sampling. Researchers begin with an ordered list of the population. After selecting a random starting point, every kth or nth individual is selected. For example, if every fifth person is required, the researcher may begin with the third individual on the list and then select every fifth person. Systematic sampling is efficient and easy to administer. However, researchers must ensure that the ordering of the list does not unintentionally introduce bias. For example, if the list is organized according to income, selecting every fifth person may inadvertently produce a distorted sample. Then we have stratified sample. Sometimes researchers know that important subgroups exist within a population. These subgroups are known as strata. Examples include gender, age, groups, provinces, race categories, income groups, education levels. Stratified sampling ensures that each subgroup is adequately represented. Suppose a university consists of 60% undergraduate students, 30% honors students, and 10% master's students and PhDs. A stratified random sample will ensure that these proportions are maintained within the sample. Researchers first divide the populations into strata and then apply random sampling with each strata. This approach often improves the accuracy of surveys, particularly when important differences exist between groups. Then we have cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is particularly useful when populations are geographically dispersed. Instead of randomly selecting individuals, researchers randomly select naturally occurring groups known as clusters. Examples include schools, classrooms, clinics, villages, wards, or municipalities. For example, a national education study may randomly select schools across several provinces rather than individual learners from every school. All learners within the selected schools or sample within those schools may then participate. Cluster sampling substantially reduces travel costs and fieldwork requirements. However, individuals within these same clusters are often more likely to be similar to one another than individuals from different clusters. Researchers therefore need to account for this during statistical analysis, choosing an appropriate sampling strategy. So as you will have figured out by now, there is no universally superior sampling method. The choice depends on the research objectives, questions, and practical considerations. Researchers should ask questions such as, is a complete sampling frame available? Is the population geographically dispersed? Are the important subgroups likely to differ? What resources are available? How precise do the estimates need to be? A well-designed sampling strategy balances methodological rigor with practical feasibility. There are some common sampling errors, which include incomplete sampling frames, selecting participants who are easier to reach than those who are randomly selected, low response rates, replacing non-respondents with convenient participants, excluding particular groups from the sampling process altogether. Such errors reduce representativeness and limit the extent to which findings can be generalized. Researchers should therefore document their sampling procedures carefully and acknowledge any limitations. Yeah. So in short, sampling is one of the most important components of quantitative research. Rather than collecting data from every member of the population, researchers select a carefully designed sample that reflects the characteristics of the wider population. Probability sampling ensures that every member of the population has a known chance of selection, thereby reducing bias. So in the next session, we'll move away from the research design and data collection to consider a topic that underpins all responsible research ethics. Thank you.